This video is basically aimed at sample users, mostly in orchestration techniques you could use within your sample-based mockups. This is a light version. I'm not scripting the voice or anything, and the one I will put in the link in the description below, you get a full score, you get XMLs, you get a free MIDI file at this website here, as well as a study score and a smaller reduction analysis that's way more in depth than what we're doing in this video. Stuff like this, you'll have like little visuals like that with highlighted things and pointing at things to look at. Like I said, the midis, just the overall reduction of stuff to really look at. And in this video, it's still the same video, except it's unscripted and you don't have all these extra tools to go along with it. But it still should be pretty useful to you if you don't want to get all that. However, doing so actually helps me bring this kind of content to you. So in other words, this is the same video, less scripted, without the study materials, free MIDI, in-depth overlays, XMLs, and score. So let's just get straight to the music. I was trying to describe like this sneaky Christmas elf in kind of a Christmas-like setting over the holidays, and that's exactly what I did. I set him to music after being inspired by some film music from an actual Christmas movie with Kurt Russell. Well, he plays Santa. So here's the music first. So that was the VSL version of the score that I wrote first. Shown here is a full score, which you can get as a download, as well as the MIDI file and a small reduction pointing out every little harmonic aspect. Oh yeah, and XMLs. So most of this revolves around the melody, and the rest and the orchestration is just purely effect, not sampled effects. So let's just go ahead and start. I'll talk about the effects in a minute. Initially starts out in simple functional A minor. And the downloadable version has everything to look for. So here's the basic harmonic outline. So minus all the chromaticism is just 1, 6, 4, 5. Very typical minor. I'm using a lot of chromaticism, which I explain in the downloadable version, like the D sharp over the A chord. That doesn't make it Hungarian minor. These are purely chromatic notes. And if you don't know how to use chromatic notes, I suggest learning how to do so. It greatly enhances your melodic writing. So what also enhances it is the ability to take your melody and harmonize it in a chordal fashion like this. This is particularly useful when you're going to split it out to groups. This is the basic version without the chromaticism, which I explain the chromaticism again in the downloadable version. The lower end still uses chromaticism too as well. Here's the part. So there's a lot of chromaticism here. This actually helps it come to life and actually sound kind of playful and sneaky. Now there's just a little drop down of a root and fifth, kind of implying an A minor chord. That's an effect, which happens before the half cadence on the E. Again, this was my starting point, the melodic content. That's why it's good to learn chordal kind of melody writing, because you could actually split it out to various instruments. In this case, 3 clarinets. So before the cadence, this little effect happens. Gliss, piz, in various groups. And if you use full type ensembles like full strings, you can't do those kind of effects. They don't sound right. And then we just have a half cadence. Also, I write my own glissandos. Don't rely on pre-made glissandos. Here's the basic outline. Real simplified, without all the chromaticism. You take out all the chromaticism, this is the bass harmony. But now looking at the melody again, look how chromatic it is. Learning chromaticism, as I said, really enhances your ability to create music and make it more interesting. So on the transition, we just have these planing diminished chords, and that kind of acts as a tonicizer to the 5 chord. I'm not going to explain how to use chromatic harmony, nor planing, because this is not a course on either one of those things. So we kind of have this, but higher. And right after that E, we go into some more chromaticism with that D sharp. I'm always emphasizing that D sharp, and it's not Hungarian minor, because if it was, we'd have a heck of a time explaining the C sharp. So the Celeste does this planing, and guess this chromatic diminished chord planing, that's very Christmassy and Tchaikovsky-like. Tchaikovsky does it in Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy. And that cadence ends with the little rapid gliss and trills, as well as pizzicatos, just giving an effect. And you notice they're all on the E note. Motion and percussive bass effects. So then we go back into the main melody again, but in flutes and piccolos. But the lower end does a bunch of walking this time, with some passing tones and some chromatic passing tones. And kind of implying that A minor chord. And then over the D implied harmony, we have this kind of triplet version passing through the flat 5 or the sharp 4. That's why I'm saying it's not Hungarian minor, this is pure chromaticism. Otherwise, you'd have a heck of a time trying to classify all these chromatic notes into one scale. That's why it's beneficial to learn non-harmonic tone type thinking. So these eighth notes of the melody are accented by various groups, like Pez, Glock, and the clarinet arpeggios. Creates a cool motion plus percussive kind of effect. So we leave A minor and go to C minor when the low end comes in, and just do this typical flat 6 arpeggio. And the lower end also uses the flat 6. Flat 6 arpeggios are super common in Western film scores, whether it's major or minor, they love them. And also note, this is just a super reduction, so we just kind of outline the flat 6 shape in the low end. And right there we shift to an E minor chord from C minor. And I explained why in the downloadable version. But this super reduction is also highly marked up in the downloadable version of what to look for. In the downloadable version, you could also see in this area there's this gliss emulating this run. This is why I don't use pre-made glisses, because I can't do effects like this otherwise. This is pure effect. It just emulates the run. And that's why I will never touch a pre-made gliss patch, because it limits what I can do. So we transition from that to E minor and just do partial aspects of the melody, then partial aspects of the melody in G minor. And these are super common modulation shifts in Western film scores. So now the partial melody is just repeated in many groups, like the horns right there, and you have little percussive effects and winds going on. Most of the time these things go completely unnoticed, and like they happen in the strings as well. You notice mostly just on the root. On the transition to G minor, they do kind of imply a harmony, like such, until the harmony of the melody changes. And right in this spot too, the melody transitions to trumpets. You'll notice throughout this entire piece, this melody is constantly kept alive. So these little background short percussive effects in groups like this just usually go unnoticed, but they really help out stuff like this to make them sound sneaky. So this is why I really don't like using full ensemble patches, is because it limits me in what I can do with stuff like that. We're staying in G minor now, and we just have a lighter version when the texture becomes smaller, and just a 2-note version of the melody, followed by a low C sharp minor chord, intentionally switching to a muddy voicing. This transitions to A minor, where again we're restating partial aspects of the melody, the Christmas Elf theme. And that shifts to a super low, muddy E flat or D sharp minor. Intentional. So this is done in clarinets, the melodic part. Again, back to clarinets. And then a 3-note version. This brings me to one of my favorite backings is this kind of Ravel-ish, kind of sometimes bowed, sometimes piz, strummed piz, and then harp. So when you're listening back to it and with the full thing, it's hard to tell actually what's going on until you look at the score. I love when stuff like that happens in music. And I'm really thankful for inventive orchestrators like Ravel. So we have this. Cool effect. So the low chords were intentionally done very low in bassoon groups and low brass. Let me and percussion, I forgot to mention that. It has a slightly menacing effect. So here's the whole part, just a backing. And it's effects like these why I would never use full patch ensembles. So we shift from there to B minor. And this whole loud section, there's only 2 voices. If you think of a Bach invention, it's just 2 voices. That's what happens here. A low end and a high end. And this is where being familiar with the horizontal plane comes in super handy. And that changes to F major, which trills on the flat third, even though it's a major chord implied on the bottom half. So there's a little intentional disjunctness between the flat third and the raised third with that trill. And this is doubled in many groups, these 2 lines, in double octaves, triple octaves, etc. Top line. And then the bottom line, which is doubled in many groups as well. And the other thing is, notice the use of like triple stops and whatnot when you get towards the final cadence. Or the cadence that brings this part to a close. So let's do a quick review of the harmonic content so far. We started in functional A minor, we switched to C minor, we switched to E minor, we switched to G minor, we switched to C sharp minor, we switched to A minor again, we switched to D sharp minor, we switched to B minor, we switched to F. So the opening melodic aspect started with very functional harmony, and then we started to make these less functional transitions. So I'm starting to treat this F chord as if it's the 6th chord of A minor. And in functional harmony, you could actually know that that often can go to the 2 chord of A minor, and you start to approach that cadence, except instead of using a 4 chord, you're throwing in that half diminished chord instead. And we're repeating that same piz scheme we did before, but like this. And the lowest note of the half diminished is not the B, it's an inversion. So when there's all these echoes happening, this chord really, really wants to go to the 5 chord. And if you understand functional harmony, you'd know why. So we have this kind of trade-off thing. And it doesn't play triple stops back well, but that's notation sounds for you. It's the same kind of thematic thing we did earlier as an effect, before we hit the cadence early in the piece. So repetition of parts, take advantage of that. Originally the first cadence was a D minor, now we're using that half diminished to E instead. Instead of the 4-5, we're doing a 2-5. And that's actually the most dissonant chord of the entire piece, that half diminished 2. As most of the interest is actually the backing and passing tones and chromaticism. So the D minor and the half diminished B kind of serve the same kind of function, but the B half diminished has a much stronger pull towards the 5. And this just echoes in various groups now, except as a D minor version, and then as 1-note version. So you have an echo of that final cadence in horns, flute groups, and then 1 lone oboe, as if it's a fadeaway kind of effect. And this sets us up to restate our melody, and that's what happens. We restate it, just a partial aspect, and then we close the piece out. We end it like that. So you notice the whole thing just plays on this melody. Most throughout the whole thing is just play on this melody, except for one part. So we have this little clarinet recap, echoed by the horns. 3 horns, that is. So once you have an initial idea, one melody, you could actually extend this for a very long period. Replay the DAW version.